Hey, Fexhagen, it's Billy here. I'm in trouble. It's Sunday and Saturday, and it's sort of halfway through the afternoon, and I've got friends coming in 20 minutes or so, and my wife is preparing food, and I've disappeared off to go and make this video back to you because I had to come back to you. I would like to say, before I do anything else, that I sincerely thank you for your approach to this. You've been eminently reasonable and very restrained, and I know this is a subject which for you is very emotive, and frankly for me is more of an intellectual exercise, because I'm not faced with this as a cultural decision or an intellectual decision on a day-to-day basis. It just isn't really an option for me. So for me, this is just a theoretical exercise, and whilst I would feel much more strongly about it if it was happening in my country, I totally get why you would feel far more emotional about this, and why a lot of the people in the comments boxes have felt very emotional about it. I mean, having this conversation, this dialogue with you is actually fascinating for me, because a lot of the comments I've got back again have been very insightful, very well reasoned, generally not terribly abusive, which I was surprised about, and generally have given me pause to think. And I guess where I fell down in my previous video is I wasn't clear as to what I was for, and I did the silly thing with the guns at the beginning to sort of give you a feel for the fact that I might not be entirely opposed to the idea that one should own weapons. I guess we're actually probably a lot closer than maybe you think. And I don't particularly want to drag this out into a really much longer process. I'm sure you've got better things to be making videos about, and I don't also want us to get to the point where we wind up trading blows. So what I would propose is this, if it's good with you. I'm going to offer what I would consider a closing statement to my arguments, and if you feel that you'd like to do the same, then do feel free, and then I won't labour the point any further. So I will give you the opportunity to have the last word in this conversation. I guess fundamentally where I'm coming from is I am broadly pro-guns. I believe that if you want to own a gun, you should be allowed to do it, but probably the restrictions which should sit around that would negate the reason that you want to own it, i.e. the resistance for the state. And you kind of said to me, well, there are two arguments you're trying to use here, Billy, and which one is it? Well, I think I'm using two arguments because there are two ways of looking at this. One is, guns for me are legitimate if you're going to use them for sporting purposes. I totally think that owning pistols, for example, and banning those in the UK was a ridiculous step. It's led to a loss of control over pistols. We have no idea where the firearms are in our society now. We know that there are more out there. We don't know the absolute numbers, and we have no means to track who might be supplying them, because there are no records, no registers. There's nothing, really. If somebody gets shot with a pistol in London, that gun cannot be owned legally, and no databases exist to track it down. So that strikes me as being bloody stupid. Equally, I think if you want to go and target shoot pistols, well, why the hell shouldn't you be allowed to do that? Quite frankly, if you want to go and target shoot the gun that you've got, why the hell shouldn't you be able to go and do that? I just think that there's no point in you owning those things in your house. And fundamentally, that's the point where you and I diverge. You are quite clearly expressing the opinion that the reason you own the gun is pure and simple your Second Amendment right, the ability to resist tyranny. And I missed that in the first place, and I should address that and nothing else. So as a closing statement, let me say this. I don't believe that a tyranny is likely to establish itself in the US by setting up shop, effectively either invading the US, which I think is extremely unlikely, or having invaded their country, or rather being a part of the government which walks in and says, okay, let's set up the camps, or let's say Obama declares himself president for life. I think that's highly unlikely, and the reason for that, and I'm sure you agree with this, the reason for that is because tyrannies tend to be things which happen by degrees rather than things which are, there it is. We're on the internet, so I can use the I think at this point I can play the Nazi card and say that's not the way that the Nazis were established. That was a democratic system, essentially. Hindenburg put Hitler in as Chancellor, believing that he could be controlled using other members of the cabinet. It all went horribly wrong, and Hitler dissolved Parliament and all the political parties, but not immediately. He waited until he'd got popular support, or popular enough support, and that's the key bit of this, popular enough support. Likewise, Russian Revolution was instigated by a few hundred people, and it happened effectively overnight, but it was a pressure that had been growing for 30 years. It didn't just suddenly come out of nowhere. This wasn't a magic moment. This was something which had been on the cards for a long time. So assuming that you agree with me that a tyranny, particularly in the United States, is not suddenly going to appear out of nowhere and materialise on your front lawn, what's going to happen if you are going to get to the point where there is a tyranny in the US and therefore the Second Amendment comes into its own, is you're going to get into a situation where laws are being passed with which you disagree. So actually it's not a question so much of resisting tyranny as resisting laws. Now, the States is a democratic society. It has a pretty good press. I mean, you can argue about the prevalence of Fox and certain news stories and the rest of it, but it's essentially a free press, even though it's controlled by the markets to a ridiculous extent. It is nonetheless a free press. You can say whatever you like, and you can, as you do, put that out in a way that people will listen to, even if it isn't in the mainstream media. If you can tap into the zeitgeist. And you have a form of democracy in the States. I think it's a flawed democracy, and one or two people have got very upset with me in the comments for saying that I don't believe that America is a proper democracy. That's an aside. Let's assume for a moment that the States is, broadly speaking, a stable, democratic state with a broadly free press. Ergo, any laws that get passed in that environment are democratic laws. They are, whether you like it or not, the expression of the will of the majority of people. Patriot 1, Patriot 2 being classic examples of the will of the people. I'm not saying they don't make fucking stupid decisions, but I am saying that there is a law-making process there which one has to buy into. The ownership of a weapon which has the express intent of killing another human being is fundamentally the wrong way of approaching society from my perspective. I don't believe that means you need to submit. So, I'll put some links up in the sidebar and you can have a look at them. We have a long and proud history in the UK of making protest where it's appropriate. And I'll just pull out the ones from the last century and you can have and these ones just occurred to me in the 5 minutes before I started doing this. I'll put them in the sidebar. You can have a look at it, Google them, read up on them. We are very big on protesting in this country. It's one of the things we do really well, and quite often we are successful in getting the law changed. Whether it's getting the law changed in ways that I personally don't appreciate, like, for example, the League Against Cruel Sports eventually getting fox hunting banned, or whether it's ways which are less successful, like, for example, I went on a march to change some union rules. We weren't successful in that case. My point is this: we go out and we protest, and we do it really well, and we do it regularly. It does not require us to go out being armed to do it, because the nature of being in a democracy says that we must collectively agree on the laws, allow those laws to be passed, and then if we feel they are unjust, we don't pull out the weapons, we pull out the vote. A gun does not mean a vote, and that, I think, fundamentally is where you and I disagree. I believe that the moment that you start to open fire on people because you are in a minority position and you believe that the law is incorrect, you are fundamentally going against a democracy and attempting to subvert it. It is entirely wrong and illegitimate for you, let's say you're my neighbour, to own a gun and then use that to dictate your beliefs on me, who refuses to own a gun with the purpose of killing somebody else.